Well,
Okay, I'm recording. We did not record the beginning of this meeting. I showed a deck of slides that I will post. And then we've been talking about what are the elements of communicating rules. And so far what we've discussed is, I'll summarize this briefly and then you can pile in everybody else. We've discussed exogenous and endogenous inputs, identifying outputs. We talked about Narasimha phrased that it was what's really doing the work, some kind of sensitivity, like what are the major the major lifters in the black box that leads from inputs to outputs. And then we talked about what rules do we have a basis for, and the communication of provenance. And then Narasimha mentioned that the IAM people have created some common modeling protocols, but there's so little known about behavioral aspects that that these are less well fleshed out. Anything else?
perfect summary. And just to the initial frame, we were discussing the scope of it, and I like that we're thinking not just about human behavior, just generally our modeling systems. Even where we have some understanding of physical and engineering systems, we still have a lot of work to do in communicating rules that are in models.
And I think so. One place that we could explore through this project, if we have more time, is I think a lot of people just, if you can't be quantified, they just don't deal with it, right? Because it's a quantitative model, and so therefore whatever the qualitative thing is hasn't got standing to be in the model. And it's something that I really hope we're able to bridge, is no longer dismissing things that are difficult to quantify.
So should we go to Raidul's proposal and talk about it as something concrete, or you want to do a little bit more of a general discussion first?
I'm happy to do what other people want to do. And I think between you and I, we are having a discussion, but I think that the people who are actually working with the numbers and the models, I think it would be great to hear their feedback. Like, how would rules be useful to you? What looks like a rule that you could communicate or pick up? And so that's why I wanted to take the specific examples. We can start with Raidul's, but then say, we're actually having trouble relating these to each other. How do we use Kartik's data? How do we use Christina's findings? I think the connection between Zara's building object and Raidul's model is the most obvious. But I think if we can collect the work of the people here in one of these frameworks and start building the framework around how we have to do that, I think that's that will force us to do some hard work. So yeah, go ahead, Raidul. You can show your slides if you care to.
Yeah. Yes, before that, I have some random thoughts to share, and this based on what I have been doing on agent-based modeling software for the last 4 and 5 years. So ABM is kind of data hungry. So the how much validated results it provides us, it depends on the how much well thought rules we feed into the ABM model. And it can be so much like easy, like we can make general assumption that, okay, this is my hypothetical assumption of how one behaves in the event of an extreme event, and put this into the equation and run the model and come up with some sensitivity analysis. But why does that ambiguity come, or why do we make that general assumption? The reason is that we don't have the data. The more granular data we provide to the ABM model, the more accurate it will have in terms of real world representation. So ABM also is kind of like a black box. The more accurate rule representation you provide that, the more accurate it will give us in terms of results and thoughts. So whenever we used ambiguity or like made very generic assumption was because we didn't have data to support that rules. And
Mm.
that's when I first joined this postdoc position. I really felt excited in the sense that we have a large data set that I was joining the meeting before I actually started Karthik's data set. I assumed that or had envisioned that based on the fact that we have this really resource like rich database, we'll be able to extract a statistical relationship that will give us some understanding what the actual rule is rather than making a hypothetical assumption of what the rules should be. So in terms of ABM, this is a paper published in Interface. So many of you know that SIS model, that susceptible, infected, and susceptible model. So basically they use a differential equation to understand what would be the contagion process, like different Ebola virus or like COVID, and they run the model and they have an output. But there has been a concern in the modeling community that you are making hypothetical assumption at the very first beginning, that this will be a first order ordinary equation. So the way they try to capture that, like the way we do ABM model is basically we run the simulation, but there is no analytical insight or no empirical validation to it when you first propose the rules. And the way they are trying to propose is that, okay, the rules, you have a very generalized assumption, but then you dig into the actual database and try to find out, okay, if your rules are validated. If it's done, if you have some statistical analysis to support that, then you will have a more calibrated equation to put or use as your rules, something like that. So that way I was envisioning making a bridge between Karthik's work and what I am doing in terms of ABM model, not just providing a hypothetical assumption or threshold like Narasimha was talking about. Whenever we make an assumption about a particular threshold, that comes from our inability to collect the empirical data. So I don't want to make that assumption. Like I have seen some of the papers like, okay, this is the equation for our total cost benefit analysis. And if the threshold is between 0.7, we'll assume that people will go for heat pump. But where does that value of 0.7 comes from? They didn't provide any literature or not any survey result. That's something I am trying to avoid in our research going forward, and that can only be supported if we have a rich database from others' work. So maybe we'll be
Yeah,
able
so I
to
think, well, one thing we have to be careful of is learning things that we created, right? Like you put stuff in a model and then you get the same stuff out and it's like, look what I discovered. Well, no, you actually just found what you put there. So that we'd have to be really careful of it. But it is something that I have thought of too, that you can somehow learn from simulations and then try to distill. So I think Narasimha referred to what's doing the work. And I think this is a way of distilling perhaps the relationships. Yeah, my thoughts are not well formed, so I will stop.
Yeah.
No, but Tammy, so go ahead, Raido.
No, yeah, I think it will mature over the discussion, but ABM model really lacks in kind of calibration and validation. It basically starts off the simple rules. You assume and you run the simulation, do the sensitivity analysis, but we need to make it more data driven rather than making very generalized assumption, something like that.
So that's exactly right. That's the premise from which we started this project. And I see right now already 3 bases for coming up with rules external to your ABM. There's Karthik's Fusion data, there's Chris's interviews, and there's Christina's current statistical analysis. And I think, and maybe the paper I had done with Miguel as well on heat pumps. I think it's going to be crude, but there may be lessons we learn from these that are consistent across different sources. So, for example, I'm increasingly getting convinced that the presence of central AC or the presence of a cooling system with a ducted air handler is a significant catalyst for people investing in heat pumps. I don't know if it drives it. I don't know if it's a tipping point, if it tips people over or what, but it seems to be a really important factor. And we got that from multiple sources, from Christina's work, from Karthik's work, and a little bit in the data that we've seen in Fusion ACS. So to me, we have the basis for a rule. It's not enough for a structured causal relationship. And this is where now we get to think creatively and transparently, but how are we going to use it? It could be something that just increases the probability, or we have a different rule for houses that have central AC or not. We get to now brainstorm one rule that actually has some empirical basis. And like that, I think we should aim to find more rules, for behavior, and see where we are. And I think that's a great, and then even maybe Ellison's adaptive comfort with the field studies there could be another basis, and there's, to me, Tammy, true convergence where we are out there a little bit on the edge, on the frontier, but it'll be crude.
But I think, Narasimha, this is also a place for the communication of provenance. And so imagine a sort of community-wide table where rules are postulated, and it says, so you've described a triangulation on the AC
Right.
and the ducting, and
Right.
that becomes very well known with multiple lines of evidence, and people can see that.
Right.
And it's not just in your paper, it's
Right.
it's in a sort of accepted communication. Whereas other things where there's been only an observation or a report or anecdotal, they can be in there and they can be reported as anecdotal, and not only us, but other people can pick them up and say, look, this is totally uninvestigated.
So I will try and aim to draw this out, maybe have a table in this review paper that picks out what rules are being used generally for representing the technology adoption decision. What are their provenances? What's the basis for it? It's actually tough, but I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor. But anyway, we didn't look at your slides exactly.
Well, we got to
right?
look at Rigel's slides.
Sorry about that. I was talking randomly. So
Okay.
I'm providing some discussion about what Tammy and I have been discussing for the last couple of weeks. And I think we have come to a decision about how we are trying to capture the interaction between occupant and building that will give us a description about how the household behavior decision-making process comes into play in the context of heat pump transition. So as many of you know that these are the 4 agents that we are envisioning to include in our ABM model: occupant, building, institutions, as in government organization, that perspective, and contractor. But for the time being, the first layer we are trying to build is focus on occupant and building, how interaction between both of these actors will give us some indicator about what will be the market penetration of heat pump over the years, like up to 2050. So we are doing that based on a cost benefit analysis approach. So say some of those variables that we will be considering for each of these actors. In case of occupant, we will be including information and every income, gender, age, and thermal comfort. And in case of building, Tammy and Zara is working on taking advantage of the restock model to extract these different variables, as in like building size, age, environment, fuel energy, that kind of thing. And how all those variables will come together to give us a decision-making process. So I have tried to synthesize all those discussion into this flow chart. So the way we have set up our ABM model is still very crude, but we are trying to build up the skeleton. Over the years, we'll have more informed decision-making process, and that will provide more muscles to that. So the trigger of an individual's probability to consider heat pump or not, or any change in heating system in their household, will be triggered by the equipment age. Once we are considering like up to a certain period of time, like 8 years or 9 years, there will be a valid people will get into the decision whether we should change our heating system or not. And then the occupant and building characteristics will come into play. So based on the occupant, we will induce more heterogeneous income distribution, block level income distribution that will give us some indication about how much economic power that occupant holds to make changes in their heating system. And in case of building, we'll be looking into what would be the indoor temperature, environmental temperature, coefficient or performance for different heating system. That will give us the estimate of the operating cost that will be summed up with other costs like installation cost or maintenance cost. So now that we have that economic power to spare and also the total cost associated with each of the technological options, I'm envisioning to apply a non-linear equilibrium utility theory, risk averse utility theory, trying to make more dynamic process into that decision-making process rather than making a generic assumption of using a threshold-based decision model. That would give some indication about at what scenario we will be seeing a transition to making changes in the heating system. And we will be able to see what percentage of people are using what technological options, and we will have the ability to have a more granular description about the market penetration for different technological option rather than seeing a more aggregated market penetration, which is kind of the norm in current literature.
So Rigel, can you help define a couple of things a little more?
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean by economic power?
It's
And
basically, go ahead.
No, go ahead, answer it first. I'll ask the next one.
It's kind of like a made up word. The thing is, how much money does they have to spare to make changes in their heating system?
Okay, so would it be something like disposable income for that block of income group, that income group?
Yes, I'm using the terminology savings.
Savings, okay.
Depends on income, wage, expenditure related to other categories in the daily life. Yeah.
Okay.
I was, okay, so I might be about to go on a tangent, but I was interested listening to Chris last week, where I had been thinking about these in terms of just pure present cost comparison. And it seemed like he was framing it more as an achievable or not achievable. And so I think economic power is like, it doesn't matter if it's $16,000 or $17,000. The question is whether you can contemplate a purchase of that size. So I like economic power as a broad framework without commitment.
Yeah, and the question is how do you quantify economic power? So you're saying savings is one potential measure of that.
But so that would be an example of the rule, right? Is like, the economic power is needed, and how do you do that? Do you do it with savings? Do you do it with calculating your income to cost ratio, or
Right. So that's what I was going to ask next. Was in the earlier slide, I thought you were saying that a household does a cost benefit to determine whether to invest. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
So then, if that's the case, that could be an alternative rule to economic power,
Mhm.
right? Because you do a cost benefit regardless of your economic power.
Mhm.
And if it turns out, so there's two questions: what's benefit? How do you quantify benefit? And I assume what you're saying is the savings, perhaps, by going to a more efficient system. But there could be other things. You get into non-quantifiable benefits like less air pollution, more certainty in terms of reliability. Who knows? But yeah, but I'm not sure how that reconciles with this. It looks like the economic power and nonlinear equilibrium utility theory are an alternative to the cost benefit.
So I would encourage us to frame this discussion in terms of how recognizing these different possibilities, which we have not decided on yet, how would we communicate this in terms of rules?
Okay, so not substantively discuss the methods, but just
We can, but I think the framing the rule presentation will give us a way. We're not gonna solve the nuts and bolts of this today, right? And so this decision will be one that we return to again and again. How do we maybe enumerate the alternatives that we could have chosen and then explain why we chose the one we did?
yeah.
So I think you're right, cost benefit is one way. Cost benefit plus some other things is one way. So how do we list those alternatives?
So
Like
yeah,
yeah.
one way is this is a decision rule, right? We're ultimately talking about a decision rule.
Mhm.
I've seen very often a decision rule expressed as a sort of a decision process, like a flow chart, right? Like if this, then this. If you pass that test, then this, and then you end up finally with a yes or no, right? As you have it. So in this state, you have defined a two-step process where the first step makes you reconsider your heating system. The second step makes you decide what you're going to choose. So to me, the first thing that I would want to see is, okay, you define two rules as your decision-making process, two-step rule. And then for each one, I would want to know what the inputs are in your decision. How do you weigh them? And then what you decided from that, right? As we were speaking, it'll be nice to take your first slide and then translate it to this case. All those elements we talked about. Inputs, outputs, elements, relationships, what's going to do the work, and try and do that for this case. That would be a nice exercise, no?
Yeah. And then I'd love to take like what Christina is finding and stack it up against, can we, I don't know if it's a flow chart, but a step-by-step chart maybe. Is there a way to actually compare findings? And then looking at the inputs that we need or the relationships that we need, can we entrust the provenance to what is coming from Kartik's data?
So should we have each of the modelers for their respective model come up with, okay, this is what we think is emerging as the rules that define when a household, when and what, when does a household decide to change its equipment and what does it pick? The results of Christina's Logit model. Kartik, I don't know what we have really, but I would say Miguel's model and not yours. So Miguel's statistical model for New York. And then for Chris's case, I don't know, we should maybe just, based on what we've heard, we could brainstorm that together. It would be nice to have that on a table with some sets of provenance for rules in the ABM.
I like the idea of having everybody kind of come up with their own rules, because I suspect we're gonna see some vast differences in how people frame it, and I think that diversity is gonna teach us something too.
Maybe. Yeah, because the provenance, the nature of provenance is different, you know? I mean, you have limited ability to derive to understand the clear causal mechanism.
Oh, that's a really good distinction. Like in the source of provenance, could the causal mechanism be distinguished?
Yeah, and you'll have different ways to do it depending upon the source, and you'll have different degrees of certainty. Like a statistical model can give you very strong correlations, or in a logit model, you have actually causality. That is the definition of a significant parameter, but you may not have confidence in its weight and the extent to which the work it does. And Chris's data, there's another question you have of generalizability. Anyway, yeah, I do think it's a useful exercise for everyone to do that. And maybe, Rydal, from the literature, you could draw out what you think are the best ones that have been most validated, you know, because, and we can discuss this, because from the model review, I myself have some ideas of what, the best sources are in the ABMs in past papers.
Sure, yeah. Let me know your suggestions. I can, do that for you and have that discussion in the next meeting, maybe.
Yeah.
One of the things I can do, what I thought after this meeting, is that maybe, like what basically Nassima suggested, is that for the ABM, I can start with ABM, having a more generalized table, giving us indicator of what are some of the rules that they have used, and trying to come up with a more generalized description about, okay, what was their process of thought, what we can extract from all those descriptions, something like that. What are some of the things that they have decided, like everybody has decided on that, and some of the things that nobody had, one or two people have maybe decided on that, but what are some of those differences, and what are some of this common background they have? So in that comparison for the ABM rules to include in our review paper, or maybe for our future research, that can be valuable. So I can have that ready here.
Yeah.
I think sorry, the way that ABMs communicate rules, they already have ways of doing that. So that might be a useful starting point. In addition, Narsima, you mentioned the frameworks that IAMs use. I'd like to look at how different people are doing it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel if it's already partially invented or has some spokes. We can take best practices from different communities.
I just posted in the chat the protocol that ABMs are usually using.
Oh, nice.
I'm not sure how broadly used that is. They have some statistics on how many ABMs paper use this, but they claim to be applicable also to other models, not just ABMs, also general simulation models. So it's very broadly, how do you communicate what you do in the model? And I assume that's kind of similar to what the IAM community is doing. So it's detached from the content that is modeled, essentially. So I think there are two different things. One is like, how do we find the rules from the literature for the specific thing we want to model? which is difficult, especially with the generalizability and things. So when I built my ABM on EV charging, I looked at all empirical studies I could find globally on like trying to distract charging decision rules. And there are a lot of studies, but it's difficult to distract the rules you would want to implement in the model because they differ a lot across countries and they don't measure the same things, and judging the generalizability from those empirical studies is difficult, and nobody really claims the causal relationship in their paper. So that's one part. And then communicating, I feel like there are a lot of protocols, but best practices, like how you communicate algorithms with the flow charts and stuff. With object-oriented modeling, you have the UML diagrams that are widely used. And then every type of model seems to have kind of a protocol how they want to communicate things. So I feel the tricky part is extracting the rules from the literature kind of, or yeah, the empirical evidence that is lacking.
Okay, so I think certainly we could start with something like that. That may be what we end up using. But I think we should just start trying to formulate and share rules and get in the practice of having to make them communicable.
So we have just 5 minutes. I have a couple of things I want to say and ask. So this is really interesting, but I'm a little nervous as well because Tammy, you brought up a broader epistemological, question for the community, about rule communication, and you're literally thinking well beyond specific applications across models and thinking about, okay, how do IAMs do it, ABMs in general, algorithms, but then specific cases of household decisions, physical systems, air pollution. It's very daunting. It seems like someone has to then take the lead in thinking about, above all these specific content areas, rules of communication. And I feel very compelled right now to focus on exactly what you said, but focus on the decision problem we are dealing with, technology adoption. And I will tackle that in the review paper in that little nugget. But I don't have the brain space to think about the broader questions you're asking about rule communication. And I'm really keen that we grapple with the substantive content of, okay, what are our rules and how do we achieve convergence? So
I was not seeing this as an expansion of your paper, Narasimha.
I know.
Okay.
I'm just wondering who's going to do it among us, because it's a whole nother thing, and a very worthwhile thing, but it's a whole nother thing. So anyway, I just want to park that as a thought, but I have a specific question to ask, please, if I can, before we close. That is, I want to write the minutes from the last meeting, and it's locked up in my head, and I'm completely drawing a blank right now. Can you all help me remember the last meeting? Like, what was the key theme? Because I thought it was a really productive meeting, and I'm looking at the notes where I started to write, and I only noted the schedule changes where we decided each one would present on an ongoing basis, but I don't have the main substance of does anyone remember any nugget of the theme from last meeting? And then everything will come out from my head. I just need that push because right now I'm drawing a blank. Was everyone in the same situation?
Right now I am. I'll try to remember.
Okay.
And I'm going to change the respect meetings to automatically record because I keep forgetting. So then
Yeah, that's fine.
not
That'll
have
be
this
helpful.
problem again.
But if anybody gets a thought about what we talked about last meeting, just send me an email, and I will remember everything about it. I know myself. I just need that trigger.
Well, you
So-
sent us a,
Did I send a summary by email?
well, no, you didn't send the notes, but it was supposed to be the, it was supposed to be on products. I think did we not talk around the PowerPoint too? the
We
theme.
talked about decision rules because I shared this paper that you then said you have seen already. So must be something with decision rules, right? A decision process or something.
Aha, I see my email that talked about the agenda. Oh, okay, okay, yeah. It was about products, about yeah. I remember now. We were talking about each of our sort of now reaching the point where we take ownership of our respective products and update each other on a regular basis about the progress on these products, and to organize our meeting around the products. And we then got to the scheduling point of who's going to present when, so that we can keep track in the whole group of progress on the products. And we also discussed about whether we would make some of our modeling meetings actually a group meeting, because it would be relevant for everyone.
Yeah, and then I got Kartik on the schedule and we moved. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you have those scheduling notes you said, so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, any other summary? I'm going to write up the notes for now, for today's meeting. And
Okay,
then you can head.
one quick thing. I am thinking of the discussion we're having now about generality of rules. As we plant the seeds now, we work on it among the team and try to practice it, and we will learn. I'm not thinking of writing this into a paper yet, but I think that as we gain experience, we will have more to say. So it's not going in our SIMS paper. It's a thing we're going to develop so we can write about it.
Okay, so we want to get ourselves to prime ourselves to think in that direction in
Yes.
our work and see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not trying to add more ballast to your paper.
Yeah, no, I wasn't concerned about my paper, just as our team as well. But I
Yeah.
like the idea of being cognizant of that in our own work. And so, and all of us, Christina, Karthik, Raidul, we should think about, okay, what are the rules emerging from our analysis for technology adoption in the household, right? So let's keep that in mind as we develop our products. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. See you soon.